Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us in another of our session today. As you know, it's one of the most important and timely topics that's been consistently discussed in various sessions around the world. And the topic is about the challenges facing businesses and accountants. Today, we have some very special guests on our panel. We have with us Mr. Russell Colborn, who is not only an ACCA, a very passionate ACCA advocate, but also a CFO at CFO Center Australia, an entrepreneur and an innovator. And Russell, I was just seeing your post today that you are now running your own weekly radio show too. Thank you for sparing the time and joining us today.
It's my pleasure, Omer. Thank you for inviting me.
Great. We also have with us our very special Vice Chair of Member Network Panel from ACCA Australia and New Zealand, Gillian Mulligan. Gillian is actually a lecturer as well. She's based in Sydney, and I can tell you from my personal experiences and the interaction over the past, is a very passionate ACCA advocate, and she is also always available to anyone wanting any guidance. So if you need to ask for some career guidance, you are facing some issues in ACCA, you want to play any part, you want to contribute or give back, she is your person. Thank you for sparing the time and joining us today, Gillian.
Thanks for having me. It's a great opportunity to speak to members both in Australia, New Zealand and Pakistan as well.
Fantastic. Now I have to do the most unpleasant and difficult task of introducing myself. So as most of you already know, my name is Omer Zaheer Meer. I'm honored to be contributing at the Global Tax Forum and the International Assembly of ACCA. Beside that, I'm also sitting on the editorial board of Policy Insights for the MES region. In addition to that, I'm the second time running chairman of the Member Network Panel, Pakistan ACCA. Beside that, I'm also heading the Taxation Subcommittee for the fourth time. In addition to that, I'm also chairing the Taxation Committee of the local tax bar, the chambers, also sitting on the various think tanks. So that's pretty much about me. We have also been joined by our last panelist for the day, Mr. Taher Sartaj. Taher is heading the Academia Subcommittee of ACCA's MNP in Pakistan, and he works at the largest public sector bank in Pakistan in the area that is the talk of nowadays, the technology area. Thank you for sparing time today and joining us, Taher.
Sorry.
Can you hear us, Taher?
I can't hear you.
Okay, Taher, we are going to continue with the discussion. Why don't you just check your microphone and the headphone? Okay, guys, so let's start with today's discussion. The first thing that we are going to discuss is the impact of COVID-19 on various businesses in your market. So we know. Okay, I've just muted everyone because somebody had noise in the background, so there was a distortion. Apologies for that. I'm going to ask the question, and then one by one, you can unmute yourself and respond to that. And after you have spoken, please put yourself back on mute so we don't get any distortions. So the first question for today is the impact of COVID-19 on various businesses in your market. We'll begin with you, Russell. Russell, we know that there are some segments who have been more impacted, for example, airline, tourism, etc. And we also know that there have been other sectors, particularly those driven by technology. So, for example, e-commerce solution, online deliveries, home shopping solutions, which have seen an astounding growth. So a case in point would be Zoom. Just at the start of the year where Zoom was standing, and immediately after COVID, how the growth basically exploded. So how do you see the impact of COVID on various sectors of businesses in Australia and generally around the world? Over to you.
Well, thank you, Omer. I think Australia has been a tale of two different cities. There are obviously more than two cities in Australia, but two different stories for cities in Australia. There's been a very tight lockdown in Melbourne for 140 days, and they came out of that about 3 weeks ago. And that has caused such an extraordinary closing of the economy, especially, as you mentioned, in tourism, hospitality, and those sort of high street shopping businesses that weren't able to open. They very quickly pivoted, and a lot of those businesses went online and provided an online offering. Whereas cities like Perth and Adelaide, which are more distant from the populous capitals of Australia, they managed to escape without these very regimented and very tight lockdowns. And because of that, a lot of the businesses here, and I'm in Adelaide, South Australia, and in Perth, Western Australia, they managed to escape a lot of the problems that were caused by the pandemic. Although, obviously, tourism and hospitality businesses were still hit reasonably hard. Now, I work for the CFO Centre, as you mentioned in the introduction, and my role is a part-time or fractional CFO within a number of businesses. And I work half a day a week within 3 organisations. And those organisations have been one's in the building trade, one's in the digital media business, and another one is in health and well-being. The health and well-being business suffered very badly because it wasn't able to open its doors, but they quickly went online, and a lot of their business turned into a subscription-based model for health and well-being information. And they're still earning an income from that. And I think when they come out of the pandemic, they'll have both businesses working. They're going to have the real opportunities with physical customers coming into their businesses, and they'll have also the legacy online business that's been left over from the pandemic, which will provide them with dual income streams. So I think businesses have been working very hard to bolster their offerings in different ways. So they're not only providing in a physical world, but they're also providing in a digital world. Obviously, that's very difficult to do when you're an airline or a hotel. But there are still some opportunities for those businesses to grow. And even in Australia, our national airline Qantas has really focused on its loyalty card and its loyalty points. And that business is worth a lot more than the airline itself. So the loyalty scheme, the Qantas Miles as they're called, that loyalty scheme is offering online shopping. You can buy wine and you can buy various products for the house and garden through the Qantas program. And that's the way that they've been keeping their online business working, is through their online shopping service. So there's been a lot of responses to the pandemic in different ways from different sectors. But I think the main message to take out of this is that businesses have pivoted and have created additional revenue streams than they had before, and they've done it incredibly quickly.
Thank you, Russell, for these insights. Totally agreed. One of the beauty about humanity is the general tendency to adopt. You throw a challenge at us, and the tendency is that we will try to our best to find a solution and adopt. So, Gillian, same question to you. Australia is a big country. Some people even say it's almost like a continent. So, in your part of Australia, what's been happening? Please enlighten us.
Hi, Omer. So obviously I work in the education sector, so that has been hit pretty hard, basically because of the reliance on international students coming across. Our borders have been closed, so a lot of the education institutions had to adapt to go from face-to-face learning to online learning and adapt very quickly. They have been, like in where I'm working at the moment, a lot of cost saving measures. For example, there has been a hiring freeze, and then also with the restrictions on travel, there has been some cost savings. Like what Russell was saying as well, in New South Wales, tourism and hospitality services have been hit pretty hard. A lot of tourists would come, for example, to see major cities like Sydney, like the Opera House, And then also cafes and restaurants. Unfortunately, there's quite a few of them that have had to close as a result of COVID-19. But it also has provided businesses, like what Russell was saying, the opportunity to adapt very quickly, particularly to go from a face-to-face service to online services.
Fantastic. That's great. Thank you for the insights, Gillian. So one thing that is the underlying theme is that some businesses were impacted more than the others, depending on the industry. And secondly, the businesses that are surviving and growing are the one that are adopting as per the situation, as per the circumstances. We know that there have been talks of medicines in the final stages, even impact and success ratio of as much as 90%. But depending on which part of the world you are based in, it might still be a good 3 to 9 months before that vaccine will actually be available to you. So we would still be looking at the current situation, the precautions, and the business restriction to continue for the inevitable. Now, the second part of the discussion would be, what did the governments, the regulators in your part of the world did to facilitate businesses, and how did it impact the businesses? So I'll start with the situation in Pakistan. Before the session, I was having a quick discussion with Russell just before you joined us, Gillian, and I was sharing that Pakistan has been a success story in that despite not having the resources on the scale of a United States of America, it still manages to not only keep the economy afloat, but largely save the people. So I'll quickly share some of the major steps that happened. Firstly, in Pakistan, the major issue was that more than 50% of the working population were daily wage earners. So a lockdown would mean that they would not have the capacity to sustain themselves. As it became apparent that the lockdown would be inevitable, the government did two things. Number one, they were one of the first countries in the world to introduce the concept of the smart and micro lockdown. So instead of locking the entire cities, they focused on the areas that were problematic using artificial intelligence, data analytics, that which are the centers, and they locked them down. Secondly, they launched the biggest ever welfare program in the history of the country named Ehsas, which means care or caring for. So what they did was that they provided cash equivalent to 3 months sustenance to all these poor families. And millions of people were delivered that as their doorsteps, again, using a national database, which Pakistan enjoys, as well as the technology that we just focused and discussed about. In addition to that, the State Bank of Pakistan started cutting down the interest rate and brought them down to a historical low level in the sphere and as per the country's requirement. The government immediately waived off all the duties and taxes on all the medical equipment that was required to fight off the COVID. So the personal protection equipment, etc. And the businesses were encouraged to immediately start manufacturing that within the country. So Pakistan, from a country that was importing ventilators, within weeks became a country that was exporting them and providing them to the world over. We also had a lot of support from China, China being a very close neighbor to Pakistan and also one of the first countries that was impacted, had some real insights that were shared and that helped shape the policy and the counter offensive. Then furthermore, in terms of economy, in Pakistan is basically an agri economy. One of the largest non-agricultural sector are the construction industry, just like in most parts of the world, even in Australia, that drives so many ancillary industries along with it. So a very unique package for the construction industry and incentives for the agricultural industry were also launched. These, along with a few other measures, resulted in a situation where Pakistan, as per various studies, is still growing at 0.5 to 2%, which is very low. But when you consider it in the regional perspective, the largest economy in the region, the neighboring countries' GDP shrunk by as much as 25% at the height of the crisis, and it is still facing a minus 11% growth in the GDP. So in that context, it's been a huge success. Similarly, the mortality, the infections have been really kept in the check. So overall, I believe that the measures that were taken, obviously there's always room for improvement. You can never say anything is perfect, but it was one of the better ones and one of the success stories. And now that we are facing the second wave, fingers crossed, hopefully we'll see the same. So thank you for listening patiently. Now over to you, Russell. If you could enlighten us what happened in Australia and how that helped save lives and businesses.
Well, Australia very clearly went for a zero or eradication policy. They went very hard, very fast to eradicate COVID from the general population. And they had a wave of infections in April and March, which caused obviously a lot of problems. But some people also felt that the lockdowns that were put in place, the very severe lockdowns that were put in place, had a worse impact on the economy than the actual COVID itself. Although that's obviously theoretical and up for discussion. But the government put in place some very key policies, including JobKeeper. And being Australian, we like to rhyme things, so we had Job Seeker as well. So those people that were looking for jobs were given financial assistance, and those people who were working for businesses whose turnover fell by 25 or 30% from the previous year were given what was called JobKeeper to ensure that they kept their employees on. And that was a very good policy to provide organizations with some form of financial benefit to keep their employees alive, but it didn't replace the turnover. So the government then introduced another form of support for businesses called the COVID supplement. And the COVID supplement was an amount of money between $10,000 and $100,000, depending on the size of your business, that was actually provided through your business activity statements, through your tax returns on a quarterly or monthly basis, depending on how often you returned your tax returns here. We're under obligations in Australia to return our tax returns usually quarterly, depending on the size of the business. As they get larger, it's monthly. And those monthly returns were credited by the government with the COVID stimulus package. Individuals didn't get a lot of help. There was a small amount through the Job Seeker, as I've mentioned. Those are the people who didn't have work and were looking for work. But that was a small payment to people looking for employment. There were other measures that the government put in place through budgets to raise work on infrastructure projects, tourism projects. There's a lot of grant work going around at the moment for businesses to apply for government grants to assist them, especially in the hospitality and tourism markets. So there was a lot of fiscal stimulus put into the market. Our economy did contract for the first time in 30 years. Australia had been very proud of the fact that it hadn't entered a recession for over 30 years. It was the only country in the G20, I believe, that hadn't entered into a recession even during the global financial crisis in 2008. But we officially entered into a recession in April this year for the second quarter of negative growth, or the contraction of the economy here. And that caused some significant hardship to a lot of people who have lost their jobs and lost their businesses. So Australia's economy did shrink. It shrank quite hard and it shrank very fast, but it has rebounded very quickly. It isn't yet back at the levels of which it was before, but the stock market is a very good indicator of how companies or countries' economies are going. And back in January of this year, of course, we had the dreadful stock market crash. And now in November, some 9-10 months later, the stock market is breaking records again. It's recovered all of the losses of the last 9 months, and it's now exceeding the levels at which it was 10 months ago. So I think there's been this paper loss of money, if you like. A lot of people panicked, and hopefully not many people sold their shares or their investments, because all the investments have just about have come back, and many of the investments in pharmaceuticals and digital, as you've mentioned before, have recovered much better than those stocks that are in general the general part of the stock market. So I think there's been some very good success stories over this period. There's obviously a lot of tragedy and a lot of hardship that's been gone through, but the government, I think, reacted very quickly, very well, and the policy of zero emission or zero infections has done Melbourne, for example, and Victoria very well. They've now had no cases of community transmission for over 30 days, and they're not expecting a second wave. So I think the governments have done very well in locking it down as well. So we have had an economic contraction, but I think we're on a good road to recovery.
Fantastic, Russell. That's great. And I think we all can learn a thing or two from Australia in terms of the eradication, especially what you shared. We hope the trend continues and Australia may become the first country in the world to completely eradicate. As far as investment is concerned, I remember, and I'm sure you'll agree, once reading in a Warren Buffett book, and I think being professional accountants, we would agree with the principle that only invest what you can afford to lose and invest for the long term. So even when the cycle is at its lowest, you would have the capacity to retain. And should you be able to do that, it is bound to come back and give you additional returns, just like you shared. Fantastic. So now over to you, Gillian. What's been happening in your part of Australia? Anything you want to add on to Russell's discussion?
Just to add on to Russell, I think his point on the eradication, the government trying to eradicate COVID, I think what's contributed to it is increase in testing. So at the start, back in March, it was only testing for people that had been overseas. But now there's been an increase in community testing and contact tracing as well. I think recently the New South Wales government now have announced that all of the cafes and hospitals start to record using a mobile phone, scan a code in to record your details when you attend those restaurants and cafes, and that will enable, if there was, hopefully it won't be, but if there was a breakout again, easy contact tracing. The other thing that the government has introduced is rent relief, both for commercial and for tenants. There has been like rent reductions and rules around eviction notices. I think there was a rent freeze for a while. And then also another measure that they brought in was early access for people to access their superannuation. That the people that needed to access that had to fulfill certain criteria, but that was a great additional support, particularly people that had lost their jobs or were in a really bad financial situation. So I think the government have done a really good job in assisting particularly businesses at this time.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you, Gillian. That's fantastic. And it's amazing how some of the measures just overlap. I think being the common challenge, the common response has been the underlying theme. So, for example, I forgot to mention and just recall listening to you, there has been the rent relief in Pakistan as well. So it's quite interesting to see the similarities. Now, over to you, Tahir. Thank you for joining us.
Thank
Tahir,
you.
what do you think has been the impact of the situation? We are talking about the COVID-19's impact on the finance professional and accountants. I mean, we are talking about businesses. So finance professionals are a business plus a vital segment of every business. So what has been the impact on our community, in your opinion?
Well, yes, there is a negative impact, and so many people, like other professional people, so similarly for finance people, yes, they have lost their jobs, and so many people are coming from out of the country to return back to their home countries, and there is a kind of a chaos, right? But at the same time, when I'm looking at the opportunities that this COVID-19 has created, So there are a number of opportunities coming in as well. There are a number of people who are getting job on remote locations basis, right? So they are doing their jobs on work from home, from work from home point of view. There are a number of people who are getting jobs for the remote locations. There are a number of people who are getting new jobs because of the new opportunities that the businesses are getting, because government has introduced a number of incentive, as you all have mentioned in your respective countries. Similarly, there are a number of incentive introduced by Central Bank of Pakistan as well for the financial sector, who are ultimately the lender of so many businesses. So there are, like, if I'm talking about the textile sector is on a boom in Pakistan, and the reason is, in a region where we are here, demands of so many things, demands of so many export related items for textile business are getting higher and higher. And there are, I'm talking about particularly of a loom industry, that looms are operating at their 90 to 100% of their capacity at the moment. And the reason is the demand from of export is getting higher and higher day by day, because there are a number of countries who are in a situation of lockdown and they are not fulfilling their orders. So there, so that's what I'm saying, that it is creating opportunity for finance people and for businesses. Definitely we are not, we cannot live in isolation. So if businesses are performing, so our businesses will also our profession is also performing. So yes, there are people getting good jobs. There are new opportunities coming in, and likewise, there are a number of things that accountants are getting their opportunities. So I believe that that's a good thing for our profession. And yes, there's a negative sign as well, that the people are losing their jobs as well. But similarly, we are getting opportunities as well.
Thank you. Thank you for your input, Tahir. One of the things that our panelists can shed further light on has been the technological adoption. So we, especially in the field of finance, do know that in various parts of the world, there has been a cultural tendency of preferring in-person meetings over the technological meetings. Plus, also the speed of technology adoption has been varying in varying part of the world. And as we were discussing pre-session, that one of the good things to come out of this crisis of COVID-19 is that the technology adoption has speeded up, and many businesses have realized that what they thought was not possible has now actually become a necessity. The adoption and
Exactly.
advancement has increased a lot. So, in terms of that, now over to you, Gillian, first. You being in the academia sector have been seeing the changes impacting not just the current members and finance professionals, but the future finance professionals as well. How is the work being impacted? How do you think the future of the finance profession will look like?
In my opinion, the role of the finance professional has changed. We've had to adapt, like with every other industry, very quickly to go from face-to-face meetings to online meetings. We've had to learn new skill set, learn new systems. I think data analytics has played a pivotal role, particularly in the future of the finance professional. You know, CFOs are looking now for real-time data, and to be able to produce that data and the right data source to the CFOs, like in real time, and in a way that they can understand what the numbers is telling us the stories. Also, the finance professional, like developing more business partnering skills, developing how to communicate financial and particularly non-financial information to various stakeholders across the businesses, particularly those non-financial people. And while I think the future of the finance professional, I think finance have play a key role. Like they're kind of like the center point where they can communicate with various departments across all of the businesses and provide information when necessary to multiple departments. And I think also the future of the profession is developing more so all of those soft skills, like communication skills, learning how to present data online as well. I know it has been hard for some people to adapt pretty quickly, but I think that's the future. And then also flexibility. Now the organizations can see that the work can be done both remotely and in the office as well.
Indeed, fantastic, especially the last point. I was expecting you to cover that, so fantastic, Gillian. So with that, we'll move on to Russell. Same question, Russell. How is the situation currently impacting the finance profession, and what do you envision the future of the profession to be?
I think Gillian makes some very, very sound points. And I think we've all got to working from home. You can see my background. I'm definitely in my lounge, and Gillian's there in her office. And I think it's one of those things that we now accept as natural. It's perfectly normal. I think 10 months ago, if someone had said to me, you'd be showing a photograph of your lounge online when you're working, I would never believe them. I think getting people to go online and have meetings online has become so quickly taken up. It's one of those changes to the way in which we work that I think people have just adapted to it incredibly quickly. And yet here in South Australia, for example, and in Australia more widely, face-to-face meetings are still very important. I think there are so many things you can do remotely, but things like innovative teams, when they're working together, they need that collaborative behavior that only comes from working around a table together and not just having one person speak at a time. Zoom has, and the other platforms have killed off the art of overhearing and not interrupting, but sparking those innovative ideas that come from magical conversations, because only one person can speak at a time. It's like holding the speaking stick in a circle. Only one person is allowed to speak. And it does suffocate some of those really clever, innovative conversations that people have when they're in a group room together. I think also we do suffer our mental health, our mental well-being suffers if we're not connected with other humans. And I think getting together in the same room, having conversations generates those warmer, more innovative thoughts and allows companies to grow faster. So whilst there's been some great changes and some great innovative ideas and the adoption of technology has been very quick, we still shouldn't let go of some of the really important things that we were doing before. Also, as Gillian mentioned, the take-up of other forms of information technology, such as analytics, has really improved some of the work that we're doing as accountants, not only just looking behind us to what's gone on before, so producing the profit and loss, the balance sheet and the cash flow activities, but looking forward to what can be and what might happen in the future. And packages like Microsoft BI Power BI have provided these wonderful opportunities for people to provide what-if scenarios, and we can model and we can look at the data that's gone before, and we can look at how things will appear in the future. So a lot of companies have taken this time during COVID to do a lot of modeling and to provide some information on to their shareholders and to their executive management as to what could happen if we went down certain routes. What would happen if we changed certain ways of doing work? What would happen if we improved or looked at different efficiencies that we could implement? So there's been lots of what-if planning, a lot of scenario planning going on, and taking the time during this sort of pause for breath, if you like, between pre-COVID and post-COVID, so that we can actually look to the future and have a better understanding of what can go on there. And that's where accountants will play a pivotal role. And I think the ACCA does an amazing job with its publications that it puts out. And I would suggest to anyone watching this video today to take a look at the ACCA publications that have come out recently on COVID-19. There's been a really good article and a magazine that's come out to do with the road to recovery post-pandemic, post-COVID-19. And there's some really good structural models that you can use in there that will help you develop and grow your business and your own skills to help your businesses come out of this pandemic in a much more structured and better way. There's a very good model there looking at what you need to do now, what you need to do looking in the next 3 to 6 months, and how you can plan for the 6 months further forward.
Fantastic, Russell. Thank you so much. I totally agree. And I would just like to add on to what Russell said, that please also check out the AB Magazine app that ACCA has launched. And Russell was referring to ACCA's COVID-19 Hub, which is basically a plethora of research materials, surveys, guidance. It's simply invaluable. Do make use of these resources. Now, the point that all of you have made it lead to my next question, which Russell, you have touched upon already, that we do know there is a human need for interaction. No matter the amount of technological adoption, the inherent need would stay there. It's also a cultural element, but it's also in our nature, being who we are, being humans. We have already seen this in many countries where the situation improved. So, for example, in Pakistan, at the height of the COVID-19 and the smart lockdowns, we were doing all the meetings online. Now, as soon as the situation improved, most of the clients started demanding in-person meetings again. And we were trying to convince them that, look, it saves travel time and all that, and it's the same. But just like you mentioned, Russell, they were missing that element, that real touch. So we had to revert back to a model where it was a combination. We were still using technology for some of the meetings online, but many of the meetings started taking place in person again. Of course, we were putting the precautions in place that at a time only this much people can be in room, etc. So building on this, the question is, do you guys foresee that once we are out of this COVID-19 situation, would businesses generally go largely on to the technological adoption that they have done, or at least a part of that would revert back? And I would like you to consider in your discussion the various segments of the businesses. So we know large corporates which have invested material amounts in building these infrastructures. Then we also know small and medium enterprises which probably were able to make do with Zoom and all the other free softwares and apps that were available. So the investment would become a consideration in that too. So why don't we start with you, Taher, and then I'll go to Russell and Gillian. Okay, Taher, over to you.
Okay. I'll take this question in this way, that after this COVID-19, businesses has invested a lot of amount in their technological area, right? Because they have to, they have to use a work from home concept. They have to keep all the employees on board. They want their employees to work from their home. So they have invested a lot. So from my point of view, it's an opportunity for them, and they have explored their opportunity. Those who were saying that it's impossible to work from home, and it's next to possible to have this kind of a structure or this much of a lift. If I am working in National Bank of Pakistan, we have a setup of more than 1,500 branches in Pakistan and out of Pakistan. So, and I belong to a government sector. So it was an impossible thing. Previously it was an impossible thing for us to work from home. That how you will manage it, how you will take the work, and how you will do each and everything. But when the situation actually comes, so we saw that we have actually worked from home, and we have to not to work from home, and that's why businesses has invested a lot. So yes, this has created an opportunity for them as well to look around, to evaluate the opportunity, and they have
Sorry
succeeded
to
to
interrupt,
some
Tahir.
extent.
Tahir, if you could just focus on this point, that in your opinion, whether the businesses would just continue with the technology adoption that has been made, revert back to the old normal, or a combination of both. I think we have lost Tahir to net issue. He'll be joining us again. But meanwhile, why don't I take this question to you, Russell?
Thank you. And I think Tahir's back now, but I think his points were well made that there has been a lot of investment in this technology by large corporations and governments. And previously, what was almost a sacred cow, you could never work from home as a government employee, it was almost frowned upon, is now natural and is being well run. So I think you've got to see there's two streams, and the two streams will be those organizations that need to be there in person. So construction industry, the healthcare sector, caring sector, the hospitality sector. These sectors need to be present in order for the job to be done. And you mentioned earlier on the looms in Pakistan getting to 95 to 100% capacity again. Clearly, those looms can't be operated from home. So workers have to attend to those businesses to actually run those parts of the business. But even so, that particular business will have a payroll, an accounting function, and an HR function, and various other parts of the business that can operate from home. So I think you'll see two streams of those people that are able to work from home will do so far more in the future, and they'll take advantage of the massive investment that's been made into the technology. And those people that have to attend to carry out their functions will continue to do so as if nothing's changed. So we're going to see those two streams going forward. But I think the management of the labour forces that attend work will be managed online through the cloud. The adoption of cloud technology will be much greater, and the cloud cybersecurity that goes along with that is going to be a massive industry for protecting our data and protecting the technology that we use. So it's all well and good to adopt this technology, but the maintenance of that technology and the protection of it going forward will need to be continued to be invested in to make sure that we don't fall foul of the hackers more than anything else.
Fantastic. Very well said and very valid point, Russell. So now we have to take the invaluable opinion of Gillian. What do you think about this topic?
Yeah, I agree with both gentlemen. What Russell was saying, depending on the industry that you're working in, if you're front facing, then obviously you'd have to turn up to work to fulfill your work commitments. And then also, if there's a need, I think companies now see the flexibility of both working from home and being in the office. So in my situation at the moment, I'm doing 2 days a week in the office, and then the rest of the time I'm at home. And it's good to have that flexibility of both worlds. And like what Russell was saying earlier, you do miss that human interaction. And it's just when you're in the office, if you've got like a question that you need to ask, or somebody comes, it's just easy to get up from your desk and go over, be socially distant, by the way, and ask that person the question, or if somebody comes to your desk and asks you the question. I think having the combination of both is important for businesses, depending on what area and what size of the business there is. And also as well, if businesses are meeting key stakeholders or having client meetings where they actually prefer for you to meet in person, I think that's really important to have that flexibility and that availability to those
Fantastic. Totally
people.
agree. So Tahir, now that we have you back with us, why don't you conclude? So the final point you have to make is, what do you think will be the future? Continuing on the technology adoption that's been done, considering the investments being made, reverting back to the old normal, or a combination?
Saying that they
Tahir,
will not back to their normal. They will come to their normal. Can you hear me?
yes.
Okay. They will come to their normal, but at the same time, they have explored the opportunity that now they have explored a new thing. Now is to start working from their home as well, right? And they can give chances to their there are number of education institutes that has taken this step and now they have created their websites. Number of schools has gone online. They have asked their students to come online. So yes, they can go back, but it's a what we can say, it's an alternate measure for their business to do this. And that's not only for the education side, that's for the business side as well, that's for the service sector as well. So for me, I believe that it has given an opportunity to for all the businesses to explore new things. And they have I mean, they by hook or by crook they have done this, and it's an opportunity for them that when in future if they want to shift themselves, they have already invested. So if they have already invested, so I believe that they can use it for their in the best use of their business.
Thank you, Tahir. So I think the consensus seems to be developing that it would be a sort of combination. There would be some flexibility depending on the sectors and businesses and the requirement for the staff to be physically present going forward. However, generally the consensus seems that the old normal is old enough to be discarded now, and we are looking towards a new future. A very intense and very thought-provoking discussion. This brings us towards the end of our session. Now we will be opening the session to the questions by yourself, the audience. We have been receiving a lot of feedback, especially on the social media and WhatsApp. Thank you for joining us today, despite being um, during the working week, and depending on which region you are in, either the evening time or the working hours time. So we really appreciate you joining us on a short notice during the working week. Now we'll start taking the question, and the way we'll do it is, if a question is addressed to any specific panelist, I'll direct it to him or her. And if it's a general question, then any of you can choose to answer that. So the first things first, the first question is, thank you for the session. It's been very thought-provoking and insightful. My question is, there has been a lot of government support during the pandemic, as discussed by you, Russell, and everyone. Do you think that this has just delayed the inevitable? That is bankruptcy, recession, and companies going out of business. Okay, it's a general question. Who would like to answer that?
Well, I'm happy to take on the first stab, Omer. Look, I completely agree with that. That's a really difficult point that's being made. That in Australia, for example, they've actually put a prevention on company liquidations. The government has passed a law that we can't liquidate companies at the moment, and that has created a lot of what we call the zombie companies. There are those companies that are receiving government support that should have gone out of business months ago. So, and that's a real hard issue that all countries face, is that businesses do start up and they do fail. Over the period of last year, there were over 300,000 companies put through liquidation in 2019 in Australia. And zero in 2020. Now, of course, the 300,000 on average that go into liquidation every year are still waiting there. They're still waiting to go through that process, and some of them are being kept alive artificially by the government stimulus packages. But I think there will be a wave of those in the new year. And some of my friends who work in administration and company liquidation work, they've had it very tough for the 2020 because they've had no work in terms of businesses that are coming to the end of their natural life. And businesses do. They go through a process. They increase their sales, they grow, and they do naturally die, like many organisms do. And of course, those companies that would naturally have died over the last year have been kept artificially alive, and these are what's known as the zombie companies. So I think there's going to be a wave of those in the new year, and I think it will. But there has been a lot of opportunity for accountants and other commercially or commercial professionals to provide advice to turn those companies around and to allow them to pivot if they weren't, if their natural death wasn't to do with the fact that the owner is leaving or there's some other reason for the company falling and failing. There's been an opportunity there to provide those companies with advice and help to pivot them and to allow them to grow into different sectors and different markets, so that a lot of those companies, not the majority maybe, but at least a proportion of those companies that would normally have gone into liquidation in 2020 may well have been turned around, and they may well have, through the government stimulus, found the opportunity to grow in a different direction, have new shareholders buy into them. And there's an airline here in Australia called Virgin Australia. It was the low-cost carrier of the country. It was Virgin Blue. It's now Virgin Australia. One of the jobs I had when I first came to Australia back in 2000 was to start that airline. I came here with Richard Branson. I started the airline, and it was very sad to see that it went into liquidation in the last few months. But that's been purchased by Bain Capital of the US. And I think they'll turn that company around, and they won't change it completely from what it was originally, which is an airline. You can't move completely from that, but it will take out a lot of the non-core roles of that airline. Some of the ground handling roles that it did, some of the passenger check-ins, some of the baggage handling roles, they will be subcontracted out to alternate suppliers. So companies will take the opportunity to pivot. They'll take the opportunity to divest themselves of non-core essential work, and they'll find ways to grow and build themselves into the future. So I think those 300,000 companies that would have gone naturally into liquidation in 2020, some of them will find pathways out thanks to the government stimulus, but others they will naturally come to their end, and that will happen in February, March, I believe, next year.
Point well made, Russell. Thank you. So, Gillian, recession or not? We don't have a magic ball. We can't really predict with 100% certainty. But generally, looking at the condition, you being a professional, what's your opinion?
Sorry, Omer, can you just repeat the question? You just spoke up on me for a second.
No worries. I'm saying, what's your opinion? Do you think we are just waiting for a global recession to happen? The question was basically focused on two parts, that all these government support packages, has that only served to delay the inevitable? Number one, in terms of the bankruptcies, zombie companies, which Russell has very eloquently answered. The second part was about a recession impacting the countries and global economy. Obviously, we don't have a magic ball, so don't feel any pressure if the prediction comes out not to be right. But just looking at the situation, what is your professional opinion? Do you think sometime next year we are possibly looking at a recession?
I think at the moment it's as Russell was saying earlier in the conversation, that Australia has already been in a recession for the first time in about 30 years. I think it depends on how the virus is going to take hold globally. Like some countries are favoring, they've had better outcomes in managing the virus, for unfortunately some other countries hasn't. Like, for example, in Europe, where there are certain countries now that are currently in lockdown. For example, my own country in Ireland, they're in, I think, level 5 lockdown at the moment, and they're due to go to level 3, which has impacted the economy and impacted services. I think it'll just depend on as well how how we manage the virus going forward, and then also with the virus and the injections, all the research being done, like for a particular solution in coping with the virus. It could be ongoing. I'm not really. It's hard to predict.
Great. And you know what, Gillian, you are very popular. I'm receiving a lot of questions directed at you. So I'm going to put like a couple of questions in one go to you. After I'll take one with Taher. So Taher, you are looking after the academia sector with regard to ACCA's MNP. Okay, please don't unmute yourself because. Thank you. I think you are not using a headphone or whatever. My voice is echoing from your side. So the question for you is, what do you see will be the future of the academia sector? We already know, like Gillian mentioned, she is going to university 2 days a week. And then we also know in Pakistan, the government has just announced the classes will be done online for all the education institutions in the largest province. And we are expecting it to spread. We already know this happened in many parts of the world. So this technology adoption does bring unique challenges. We know at times there are internet connectivity issue, like Russell was mentioning, the human element, the magic conversations are not there. Like Gillian mentioned, you can't really immediately go and get an answer or a solution to a problem. So all these challenges are there, but it also offers the flexibility and added benefits, the impact and future for the academia sector. Now you need to unmute yourself, Taher.
Yes, there are challenges, and I believe that work from home and taking lecture online or keeping all the network through online, it's a difficult thing, right? There are few, you can say there are 10 or 20% or even 30% of the institute can go online, but you can't uh, just there are sorry for the disturbance. Actually, I'm in office, and that's why the routine is going on. What I'm saying is it's a difficult thing, and it's a difficult situation for everyone, because if we talk about from academia point of view, it's very difficult to operate the whole education system through online. It's very difficult. You can say that those who are having very good infrastructure, they can teach their students online. But we can't generalize this thing to 100% of your institutions. It's very difficult. So what I'm saying is, uh, it's a difficult thing, it's a challenging thing, and government is taking a step, but it's all depend upon the education sector, that how they are going to cover such things. Like, if I give you the example of in the last 6 months, ACCA has cancelled their attempt, right? A and O levels, that is, they have not taken their papers. So there are a number of things that is going on, and they have to continue such things for the next 1 year as well, because I
Fantastic.
don't see.
Sorry to interrupt you, Tahir. Thank you. We have reached the end of the session, but we had a lot of questions. two questions we promised to put to our audience. So if you guys agree to be very brief and stay for like 5 minutes, then I can put those questions to you. Firstly, to you, Gillian, my question is to Gillian. Thank you for your participation. What did the New Zealand government do that they are not facing the second wave, but in Pakistan and rest of the world, we are facing second wave after successfully controlling the first wave? So what is the secret recipe? Over to you.
I'm not overly familiar with New Zealand because as I'm based in Sydney, but as far as I know, I do have relatives in Sydney, in New Zealand, and I think they've adopted pretty similar measures to Australia in combating the virus. I don't think they've had many or if no cases recently.
Sorry to interrupt. I think what he meant was Australia and New Zealand.
And New Zealand.
Just focus on Australian ears.
Yeah. Sorry, you just broke up on me again.
I think he was actually meant to be asking about Australia and New Zealand. So you don't need to worry about New Zealand. You can just tell the secret recipe of Australia.
I think one of the key things was closing the borders. I think that's helped Australia in combating the infection. And then also, as I said earlier, we do have a really good healthcare system, and the increased testing of the disease, and then also when there has been clusters, the government reacted pretty quickly in trying to maintain the spread of the virus. I think that's assisted us greatly. And then also what Russell was saying earlier on, Victoria did have a bit of a breakout, but now recently they're over 30 days COVID community free. The same in New South Wales at the moment. As far as I know, there hasn't been any community transmissions. So fingers crossed it stays that way for the foreseeable future.
Okay, last question of the day, and it's directed to all of us with a request for brief response by all of us. The question is that one of the biggest can you mute yourself? Thank you. Sorry for that. Okay, the question had a request that if we could all give our quick response to the question. One of the biggest challenges I faced, especially in professional service and other service-oriented sectors, has been managing the productivity. What has been your experience? Russell, our go-to guy to open.
Well, employee productivity is something that we've had to keep a very close eye on for many years. And I think what's happened now is with the advent of the take-up of technology so quickly, cloud-based monitoring of our employees in terms of their productivity has improved considerably. What we can actually see in terms of results as opposed to activity. So what we're looking at there is outcomes as opposed to activity. And I think that's the way a lot of performance measurement and productivity has gone. It's moved ahead from output to outcome. And that's what the ability of using the technology that we have now has given us that opportunity to see the outcomes as opposed to the output.
Fantastic. Gillian, any closing comments on this question? How are you managing the productivity?
Like what Russell was saying, I think there's been an increase in productivity. With the flexibility of people working from home. And then I think it also has increased with people having to interact online.
Plus,
and bringing people together.
The day never ends. Like you are working and working because you are now available on technology 24/7. Do you also feel the same?
Yeah. But it's good because you get to interact with a wider audience. You know, this opportunity of us meeting tonight online, you know, having that infrastructure in place, like, and connecting with people in different countries, and then also as well, like for example, in with ACCA, we've had a lot more of an uptake with a webinar series as well. Our numbers have been absolutely fantastic with the amount of people joining our webinar sessions, and there's been a lot more interaction with people because we were in different time zones here in Australia. So Perth is a couple of hours behind us, and South Australia, even New Zealand as well. New Zealand's about 2-3 hours in front of us, and having the facilities for everybody, for all ACCA members to communicate online, I think it's been a great asset.
Okay, great. So Tahir, how have you been managing the productivity? People working from home, using technology, not really those kind of checks and balances. How have you been managing it? Tahir, you need to unmute yourself, my friend. Tahir, if you can
I'm
hear
not
us,
facing
you
this
are.
kind of a challenge.
Now we can hear you. Tahir, you need to unmute yourself, my friend.
I'm already unmuted. Am I muted? Can you hear me?
Now we can hear you. I think there has been a lag.
Hello?
There is some net speed issue. Carry on, please.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hello?
But now we know
Tahir,
how
if
the
you
net
can
speed
hear
is
us,
at National Bank.
can you hear me? Okay. What I'm saying is I'm not working from home at the moment. Since mid of August, we are working from
I think we are having connectivity issues with Tahir. So when he'll be back, I would request him to put the answer to this query with his feedback on the video of this session. But let's bring it to the conclusion. I would like to thank all of you for joining today, and a very special thank to all our panelists, especially Gillian, because she had to manage at the last moment when Michael got sick, and she immediately got in touch with Russell and got us the fantastic Russell. Thank you for joining us, Russell, on such a short notice. And with your insightful contributions, we are glad that you were able to. Gillian, you have been fantastic. It didn't look like this was your first session, and we are definitely going to do a lot more of these. Tahir, despite the net issue, your contributions have been valued. Thank you for joining us all. And thank you, everyone. We'll be signing it off for now till you join us in the next session. So stay tuned, keep checking the channel, and we'll bring more sessions to you. Take care. Have a good day.